how's it going? I gotta speak real soft like because it's 2 in the morning. If you recognize that ad. Anyway, I woke up and found myself listening to a podcast by Naval Ravikant, which is an Indian American entrepreneur and an investor in something like 200 companies in early stage startup, including Uber, Twitter, Wish, Stack Overflow, a bunch of other ones I can't remember. But anyway, so it's pretty, spot on. It's pretty smart guy. And he's talking about how kids are naturally curious, and they start out, they're very excited to learn, and they ask a lot of questions. They want to know about things, and that our education systems, unfortunately, they, instead of educating them, they begin to beat them into compliance, essentially, or push them into compliance, which I think I tend to agree with. I've seen this a little bit too frequently. I've seen it, I've experienced it myself as a child. And now as a parent, I'm experiencing it again with my child. And something happened today that, reminded me of all of this stuff and made me, really angry. So when I was a kid, I had, in the 6th grade, I had this teacher, Miss Hines, who was kind of a bitch. I didn't like her. She was always, and I'll tell you the story, her story next. It is the earlier story, but I'm going to tell it to you afterwards, because it's quite relevant in this circumstance. But I had this other teacher as well, in the 8th grade, Mr. Milner, and Mr. Milner was okay. So there were these two in the 7th grade. The two top kids in the class was Mark Bosley and me. Okay, we were basically in competition for first place. Now, Mark was absolutely amazing. I mean, I was in competition with him. He was an amazing artist. I couldn't compete on art. His handwriting was beautiful. My handwriting was awful. He was good at math, and so was I. He was good at science, so was I. But he was just better at presentation than I was in general. And he was amazing on the viola. He played the viola, and he was just really great. I, on the other hand, played the violin, and I didn't do so well on it. But apart from those things, like on academic stuff, I was pretty much head-to-head with him. His mom, by the way, was a math teacher, and this kind of played a big role in why, and of course my parents being academics, we both had a similar background in that regard. But that was in the 7th grade. In Form 2, the 8th grade, we had Mr. Milner. Now, up until then, our teacher was normal. She celebrated the smart kids in her class. But Mr. Milner wanted to put the smart kids in their place. He wanted to show us, you're not so special. You're not as smart as you think, you arrogant little shit. That's sort of the attitude that he took. And Mark didn't handle it very well, because in the 8th grade, he just turned around and he just became one of the bad kids. He became badly behaved. He slacked off in school. He didn't really hang out with the bad kids. He got into all the stuff that they got into. I don't know what happened with him, because he didn't continue at the same school as me when we moved out to high school, which is, he went to a different high school than I did. But for me, it was crappy being with Mr. Milner, because he deliberately always would try to put me in the average group when I knew that I was in the top reading level. For instance, I'd read all the classics. I read like 400 or 500 pages per day, every day. I enjoyed reading. There was no way that I was in the average group, but he kept me in the average group so he could normalize me, so he could make me feel like I need to be normal. in mathematics, he did this really weird. I remember one, like I was way ahead of my class for the entire time that I was in school. I was always far ahead because I was studying math out of the university textbooks, not out of school books, which we didn't even have any of. And I remember the previous year, I had covered negative numbers, pretty well. But he formatted his negative numbers in a really weird way. Like he would write, 2 plus minus 3, and the plus and the minus would be the exact same sign. There would be no difference between them. They'd just be side by side. Now, that notation and I did a mathematics degree for my first degree, and I never, at university, and I never saw that notation. I don't think that notation was a real one. And so when I saw that, I didn't really understand what I should do with it. And it confused me. But he should have, the correct notation would have been to either put the polarity on like as a superscript, or to put brackets around the number with its sign, so that you would know I would know that it should be multiplied. But anyway, just an example of one of the things that he did. And so when I didn't know how to respond on that test, he just didn't give me the benefit of the doubt and put me in the lowest group in the class, which again, I don't even understand which of the students in that class, having never studied negative numbers, would have actually known how to solve this. In any case, just to show you that this was pretty much deliberate, I think that this shows that there was a point at which I had some issue with one of the other kids in class. And I went up to the teacher and I wanted him to help. And I said to him, I'd like to move from this seat. I don't want to sit with this kid anymore, or with these kids anymore. They're picking on me. They're giving me a hard time. I'm trying to, get ahead. I want to focus on my school. And he said to me, Jim, ever since you came to my class, you haven't made any friends. I'm thinking, so fucking what? Like, I don't come to school to make friends. I come to school to learn. I know I'm not the most relatable guy. I get it. You're probably thinking, what a dick, but whatever. And because I was a little bit of a dick, but I knew what I wanted. I knew what I was there for. So anyway, and then he said to me, when you first came to my class, I asked everybody in the class to write a little something about themselves. And you wrote, I am intelligent, and you wrote it with a J. And I'm like, isn't it with a J? Now, that was one of the areas that I was a little bit, that he criticized and used as a point of weakness, that he wanted to show me that I wasn't good at spelling, that my handwriting wasn't the best, which is, fine. Yeah, okay. I knew those things and I wanted to improve those things, but it was just like, well, here I am, motherfucker. There's autocorrect, there's computers and spell checks and whatnot. And honestly, not knowing how to spell is really not really such a big problem anymore. And even back in those days, I was one of the few children who was typing assignments on the computer and printing them off. So neither my handwriting mattered, nor did my spelling, because I was learning my spelling as I went. Now, anyway, that's neither here nor there, but I can't, I'm nearly 40 years old and I still remember that teacher. I remember his name and I remember the crappy experience with him. It was a pretty terrible year, honestly, because not only was I, I spent a lot of time in school bored because I knew things that the other kids didn't know, and I was just waiting for them to catch up. But what was worse with his class, is that he celebrated, honestly, kids that were just normal for doing what was normal stuff. And he deliberately put down the smart ones. He deliberately made us feel that we weren't good enough. Now, I think that he was practicing some educational philosophy or some crap that he was working on, because I know he was doing a master's degree at the time. And he is now, by the way, the headmaster of that school, and has been for quite some time. So, yeah, he was probably implementing some stupid philosophy of theirs, trying to beat compliance out of us. Well, in any case, now, the recent experience was with my child, who has a similar teacher. We went to her early, and only at the recommendation of his kindergarten teacher, who was amazing, who told us that your son has no issues with the German language. He speaks it natively. He's at the same level as the other kids, in terms like native speaking kids. The doctor that saw him before, because we have to take him to a doctor to evaluate him before he enters elementary school, who decides if he's fit for school. And she said that his German was better than German children at his age. So his teacher has said to us, be careful, because they tend to overhear. Kids here are not as advanced as your child is. He already knows how to read and write and do math. And most of these children don't even know the alphabets yet. So he might very well might get bored. Tell his teachers early, so that they can maybe advance him or give him something a little bit more challenging. Otherwise, he will get bored and he might start to act out. Well, we did that, and we thought that this teacher was quite understanding, and we thought, great. As it turns out, this teacher is one of those ones who wants to normalize the smart child. She wants to make him feel like you're not special, you little shit, like she's vindictive about it, you know. So, for instance, during quarantine, she was sending a crap load of work for the kids to do at home. I don't know why, because she certainly wasn't covering anywhere near that much material in school. And he, started to, he did all the work. He did it all. He did it well. And she would ask, are you sure he's doing this by himself? She couldn't even believe it. Obviously, nobody else was completing anywhere near that amount of work. And she would say, oh, he doesn't have to do everything. Okay, but he is. Like, whether he has to or doesn't have to, you're assigning it. He's doing it. We're not teaching our kid to do the minimum. And then that wasn't enough for her. She would send him a message in German, or talk to him on the phone in German and tell him, you don't have to do all of this. And of course he'll come and be like, hey, Mom, how come you're making me do all of this when I don't have to do it? Which is, instead of the teacher coming along and saying, hey, good on you, good job, you're doing, really well here. Instead, she decides that she needs to normalize him and make him like everybody else, which baffles the mind. I started, of course, to look into moving him out of the school. We're still working on it, but, with that said, we've also, so today he comes back, he's got some tests that he's done in German and in mathematics. And, for instance, she writes in his report, he works comfortably with numbers up to 10. No, he doesn't, bitch. He works with numbers up to 1,000 and 10,000, actually. And he does them in his head. He and I practice on the way to school. She's trying to normalize, just put him in that box with everybody else. Anyway, so I'm looking, so let's talk about the math one first. On the math one, he gets 2 errors, and I'm looking, what's wrong with these? The answer is correct. What's wrong is, I suspect, that she couldn't read, she read the numbers wrong. So there was a 7 that she thought was a 2. It's a kid. There's a tiny little space for them to write in, and it's an easy thing to confuse. My question is whether or not she could read it. Certainly you could give the benefit of the doubt here and say this, he seems to know all the other ones. This looks like it could have been a 7. Perhaps it was a 7. All she'd have to do is put the stroke in the middle to show that, okay, if this is a 7, then it was right. But no, she marks it wrong completely. That's it. No explanation. Similarly, with another one, there was like a 9 that could have been an 8. But if she just looked one row up, there was an 8 that he'd written, and it didn't look like the 9 that he'd written. So she basically marked him wrong on things that he'd written correctly because she couldn't read, because she interpreted it one way when it was something else. I sat him down and asked him, what's his number here? And he said to me the number, and that's exactly what the right answer was. I asked him, what's this number here? And he told me the number, and it was exactly what it was. So I was pissed off about that. And then there was a question in German where basically, so they were asked to draw a drawing of something, and it said something like Lola is paddling in the sea or something like that. That was the translation of the sentence. And what he did was he drew Lola in swimming, basically paddling. What the teacher wanted was for him to draw Lola in a boat, paddling as in rowing a boat. Now, there is always the possibility that the words are different, that, yeah, okay, maybe in German it's not common enough, it's not common that paddle doesn't mean the same thing as in English. But I went and I checked and I was like, but there's the doggy paddle, for instance. Surely, what do they call it in German? And sure enough, it's called basically doggy paddle. Used the same word. So clearly, paddle means the same thing. Basically, that sort of fast, brisk sort of movement in water. And again, I was like, okay, well, she has something in her mind, and because he didn't give her that, there was two possible interpretations. He interpreted it outside the box differently from how she did, and she marked it wrong because it wasn't what she had in mind. Now, this reminded me of a teacher I had, as I said, in the 6th grade, Miss Hines, who one day, so when I was much younger, when I was like in the 1st or 2nd grade, my teacher had reported to my parents that I was reading at the level of a 16-year-old. So by the time I was in the 6th grade, I would have at least maintained my level. Probably I would not have gone backwards. I was reading a significant amount of literature, and I'd read, like, basically my father would bring the books that he was teaching his students at university, and I would read from those books. And so he told the teacher, what are you talking about, when she said to him that, he's not reading very well. And okay, so she asked me this question, I remember, on the test, and she said to me, what does sidled mean? And it was part of a sentence in a book that she'd given me to read. And I read it there, and I took kind of a guess at it, and I think I said moved sideways or something like that, just from the context of what I was reading, and I didn't know the word. It's an unfamiliar word. At 6th grade, that's not exactly a common word for you to come across and know what that means. So when she was telling my father about this, she said to him, yeah, his reading level is not really so good. It's below average. He said, what are you talking about? He was reading at the level of a 16-year-old when he was in the 2nd grade. He's read all the classics. She goes, oh, then he probably reads without understanding. He was pissed off. When he came home, he said to me, come here. Every day I want you to pick out 5 new words, 5, 10, I forget if it was 5 or 10, 5 new words, let's say. Put them into this book. You write the word, you look up in the dictionary the definition of the word, and then you write a sentence using that word. And I want you to do this every day for 5 new words every single day. And that's what I did. And by the end of the exercise, by the time I had another test with the teacher, I'd actually covered quite a big vocabulary. I'd learned to spell a bunch of different words, new words. I'd had a whole vocabulary from sailing, from animal adventures and things like that. I was reading like a lot of different books in different areas. And so I went back again, had another test with her, and she asked me the same damn question because she's a piece of shit. What does sidled mean? And I said to her, it's the way a horse walks It's like that. It's a dictionary definition, basically. The way that the horse walks, it means walking sideways, and she didn't like it. Why? Because she was looking for the metaphorical meaning that was used in that context, that it was somebody walking in a timid or shy way. I didn't know that, of course. I'm a kid. I'm a little child. I don't understand that there is this subtlety that you're supposed to find in this. But here's the thing. I gave you, the first time I guessed the right definition, essentially. There is nothing wrong with that answer. It's just not the one you were looking for. And the second time, I looked it up and confirmed that my answer was correct and stuck to it. You still didn't like it because it wasn't the answer you wanted, right? And you can see here that this is basically the same scenario, right? They're trying to get compliance rather than to teach you. Because if you were actually looking to teach the child, that's it, dude. You came up with an answer that's different from what I had in my head. It's not wrong. Give it to me. Tell me. And guess what? There's another explanation for it, which is that. Cool. Now I've learned 2 different meanings to the word. Now I understood. I never learned from her what she wanted to know, by the way. I learned this later on. And I'm sure that my kid didn't have that experience either. All he saw was that he got it wrong. There's just right and there's wrong and there's nothing else. He didn't understand why is it wrong that Lola is swimming. So what I did was I wrote back a letter to the teacher and I told her. I know that there's a really good chance that what I say has no impact whatsoever. But I told her I stood up for my son. And I said, and I don't care that the German system is like this or it's not. I stood up for this because I think that, and I said to her, you should have given the benefit of the doubt if you're interested in his education instead of trying to get compliance out of him. What are you teaching him here? Is this a math test or is it a handwriting test? And so on. And I laid out this argument to her, politely, of course. And I sent it off. And then I brought my son. And I said to him, come here, sit, take a look. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you. You did really well. And those ones that the teacher said were wrong, she's the one who was wrong. She doesn't know math. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Look, I wrote her this letter. And I read him the letter. I showed him what I'd written to the teacher. I read it out to him. And he was so happy. He was over the moon that his dad stood up for him. Defended him against his teacher's unfairness. She was unfair, and his father stood up for him. And I think that that's a really important thing to do, to let your kids know that their teachers aren't always right, and you teach them what you think is right. And I think that you should teachers like this should be put in their place. I mean, she may not change. She probably will never change. And she'll continue to do this. But now she knows that I'm not leaving this shit alone. Whether she likes it or not, this is a gifted child, and she's not going to normalize him. I refuse for her to normalize my child. And if you care about yours, don't let anybody try to normalize them either. Not you, not anyone else. That's the thing, though. When you're special, when you are outside the box, that's where you belong. You need to stay outside the box. You have to stay outside the box. You gotta know, and sorry, but I don't tell my kid anything other than you are special, you are different from the rest of them. When he tells me, well, the other kids are doing, I'm like, dude, you're not the other kids. They're normal, they're average. You're gifted. God has given you a gift. It is your job to take advantage of it and make the best of that gift. I don't know that it's the right thing to do, but it's what I believe in. And I hope that this inspires you too, if you have kids. And I hope that if you ever are in a position to teach others, to influence other people, to give advice. Remember, sometimes there are people who are outliers, not outliers because they're below the curve, because they're not being normal doesn't mean that they are underneath the curve. Sometimes it does mean that. But sometimes not being normal means they're above the curve. They're above everybody else. And because of that, of course, they're going to think differently. They're going to do things differently. They're going to always come out of the box. I'm going to give you one more. I had an interview with Google years ago, long time ago. They gave me an interview, and the interviewer asked me a question. And I must have come back with an answer that was so outside the box that he'd not heard anything like it before. It was an algorithmic question, and he asked how I would solve this, and I gave him a solution. He was like, huh. Like, I could definitely hear how he was like, almost like, jeepers, like, whoa. I don't know what he thought of it, but I definitely got contacted afterwards on the basis of that. It's just, I had at that point decided I didn't want to do programming as a job, and I'd moved on. But in any case, just to wrap things up, let me know if you had any experience like that, and whether you think that I did the right thing, or how you would have handled it in my place.